I remember that moment vividly. The room was flooded with sunlight, yet the air felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken tension. The three of us sat apart in expensive leather chairs, each acting as if the other's very presence might contaminate their space. Olivia, the eldest, sat stiffly with her sleek brown hair pulled into a tight knot and an expensive business suit clinging to her frame. She kept glancing at her watch, clearly impatient. James, the middle sibling, sat upright, expressionless, his icy blue eyes sweeping across the room with cool detachment. And me, Ethan, the youngest, the one who hadn't been home in 3 years, sitting there awkwardly in a wrinkled shirt, trying not to look completely out of place. "Can we get this over with?" Olivia snapped, her tone as sharp as a knife. "I have an important meeting this afternoon." Attorney Peterson, a graying man in his late 50s, nodded politely. "Of course. Thank you all for being here today." He pulled a thick stack of papers from his briefcase. "I will now read the last will and testament of William Hart, as per his instructions. For my daughter, Olivia Hart, who has remained loyal to the family business, I leave 40% of my company shares, along with the Manhattan estate and the vacation home in the Hamptons. For my son, James Hart, who proved himself a talented businessman, I leave the remaining 40% of the shares, the Aspen Resort, and my vintage car collection. And for my youngest son, Ethan Hart, I leave the small apartment in Brooklyn and the sum of $500,000. I almost laughed. $500,000. To a billionaire like my father, that was pocket change. Spare coins dropped in the gutter. "Is that it?" I asked, doing my best to keep my voice even. "That's it," Olivia said briskly, rising to her feet. "I told Dad he should have cut you out entirely. Honestly, he was more generous than I expected." I felt the heat rise in my chest. "Generous? You call that generous? After all the years I spent trying to earn his approval?" "Trying," James cut in, his voice dripping with disdain. "You call disappearing in the middle of the night and sending Dad into cardiac arrest, trying—" "He had a heart attack?" I nearly shouted. "This is the first I'm hearing about it, Why would we bother telling you?" Olivia snapped. "You chose to walk away from this family." "Enough," Peterson interrupted firmly. "Mr. Hart anticipated that tensions might run high. That's why he prepared something else." He pulled a small USB drive from his briefcase. "This is William's final message, recorded just 1 week before he passed." The large screen flickered to life, and my father's face appeared, thinner than I remembered, but still carrying that same commanding presence. "My children," he began, his voice strong yet weary. "If you're watching this, then things have gone exactly as I predicted. You're fighting over my assets, and perhaps over more than that, the way I treated each of you. I was not a good father," he continued, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "I placed too much pressure on you. And now I see. I drove you apart. But there's one thing you need to know," he said, and suddenly his eyes seemed to gleam with something. "Hope? The will you just heard, it's only part of the plan. The rest will be revealed in 24 hours, and it will change everything." The screen went dark. The room sank into an even heavier silence. "What the hell does that mean?" Olivia demanded, her voice trembling. Peterson placed a thick envelope on the table. "This contains the remainder of the will. As per William's instructions, I am not authorized to open it until 24 hours have passed, and only if all 3 of you are present." "So, what are we supposed to do now?" I asked. "You have 2 choices," Peterson said calmly. "Leave and return in 24 hours, or stay here, in the estate where William spent his final days. What none of us knew was that my father's final message would tear our world apart. The final legacy." Part 2. We all agreed to stay, not out of any lingering sense of family loyalty, No, we stayed because we all wanted to know exactly what Dad had been hiding. A few hours later, Peterson left, leaving us alone in the massive mansion, the home I had once run from 3 years ago. "I'll be in my old room," Olivia said, not bothering to look at either of us. "Don't bother me unless it's absolutely necessary." James simply nodded. "Same." And just like that, they vanished down opposite hallways, leaving me alone in the cavernous living room. I wandered through the familiar halls, past walls lined with perfectly arranged family portraits, none of which had been updated in the past 3 years. It was as if time had frozen the moment I left. I stopped in front of my old bedroom door, feeling a strange tightness in my chest. When I pushed the door open, I stood frozen. Everything was exactly the way I left it. The bed, the desk, even the old books and battered camera I had thrown aside in anger. Not a speck of dust. It was as if someone had been keeping it ready, waiting for me to come home. I picked up the old camera, and the memories hit me like a wave. It was the only gift Dad ever gave me without strings attached. I still remembered his words on my 16th birthday. "Find your own perspective, Ethan. The world isn't always what it seems." At the time, I thought it was just advice about photography. Now, I wasn't so sure. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. James stood there, still in his expensive suit, though his tie was loosened and a few shirt buttons undone, something I'd never seen him do before. "Coming down for dinner?" he asked in a neutral tone. "We're cooking?" I asked, genuinely surprised that James even knew where the kitchen was. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Maria's still here. She made dinner." Maria. Our housekeeper for over 30 years, the woman who had raised us more than either of our parents ever did. My heart thudded faster at the thought of seeing her again. When we entered the dining room, Olivia was already seated, still in her sharp business suit, though she had swapped her heels for a pair of house slippers. She didn't even look up as we came in. "Ethan!" A warm, familiar voice called out, and then I saw Maria. Her hair was completely silver now, but her smile was just as radiant. "You're finally home," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. And just like that, the tears came. This was what home felt like. "Are you all right?" she asked, stepping back to study me. "You look too skinny. What, don't they feed you properly out in California?" I laughed through my tears. "I'm fine, Maria. Really happy to see you." "Can we eat now?" Olivia interrupted coldly. "I have some important calls to make tonight." Maria shook her head and sighed. "Always rushing, Miss Olivia, just like your father." It wasn't a compliment, and all of us knew it. Dinner was painfully quiet. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the occasional shuffle from Maria in the kitchen. I watched my siblings, wondering when we had become such strangers. It wasn't always like this. I remembered days when we played together in the gardens, nights we snuck downstairs to steal Maria's cookies. When had it all fallen apart? "What was he like?" I blurted out suddenly, breaking the heavy silence. When he was dying." Olivia and James both looked up, surprised by the question. "Weak," James said eventually, "but still stubborn as ever, still working up until his last day." "Did he ever mention me?" I didn't know why I asked. Maybe a part of me still desperately craved my father's approval. Olivia put down her fork and looked at me, really looked at me. "For the first time since I returned. He kept a photo album of you on his desk, photos you took in California. He never talked about them, but they were always there." I stared at her, stunned. "How did he even get those photos?" "He hired someone to keep tabs on you," James said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You really thought he'd just let you disappear without knowing where you were? But he never contacted me," I stammered. "Because he respected your decision," Olivia said, her voice soft for once. "He thought you needed space." It hit me like a punch to the gut. All these years I thought he hated me, but all along he had been watching quietly from a distance. "Did he ever say anything about me leaving?" I asked, my voice trembling. James and Olivia exchanged a look, debating whether to tell me. "He said you were the bravest of us all," James said finally, "because you dared to live your own life, something he never could." Tears welled up in my eyes. That was all I ever wanted to hear, and now it was too late. "But he also said you were selfish," Olivia added, her voice sharpening again. "You didn't think about how it would hurt the family, the company, our reputation." "Reputation," I repeated bitterly. "It was always about reputation and the company, never about us, never about who we really were." "You don't understand," Olivia said, shaking her head. "That was Dad's legacy, the only thing he could leave behind." "No," I said quietly, struggling to stay calm. "His true legacy was us, his children. And look at us now. 3 strangers who can't even sit at a table without fighting." The words hung heavy in the air. Olivia dropped her gaze to her plate. James stared out the window, as if searching for an escape. "I'm sorry," I finally muttered, pushing back my chair. "I shouldn't have said that." "No," James said unexpectedly, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "You're right. We've become exactly what Dad wanted. Efficient, successful, but hollow." Olivia stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her wine glass. "I don't need to listen to this. We're here to deal with the will, not to unpack Dad's parenting mistakes." She stormed out, leaving James and me in heavy silence. After a moment, James rose too. "You should get some rest," he said without meeting my eyes. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I nodded but didn't move. Instead, I sat there alone, surrounded by the ghosts of old family dinners. The ones where Dad only asked about grades, achievements, and future plans. Never about happiness, never about who we really wanted to be. Later, I wandered through the empty mansion, trailing my fingers along the cold, expensive furniture and priceless artwork. It all felt sterile, hollow. Nothing about this house reflected the real William Hart, the man behind the strict facade. I stopped outside his office, heart pounding. This room had been forbidden territory when we were kids, sacred ground. I placed my hand on the doorknob and, half expecting to hear Dad's barked orders, pushed the door open. Silence. The office was just as I remembered, grand, solemn, with the massive oak desk and the towering shelves packed with books. I stepped in, running my fingers across the polished wood of the desk, wondering how many million-dollar deals had been signed here, how many lives had been changed. And then I saw it, a small photo album tucked in the corner of the desk. I flipped it open and gasped. Just like Olivia said, it was filled with my photos from California, beaches, street scenes, people living their lives. But what stunned me was that underneath each photo was a handwritten note, detailed comments about the composition, the lighting, the emotion captured. Dad hadn't just kept tabs on me. He had studied my work, appreciated it. Not as a disappointed father, but as an art lover. Why had he never said anything? Why keep all of this hidden? I kept searching, pulling open drawers I had once been too scared to touch. In the bottom drawer, I found a small wooden box with our names carved into the lid. Inside were 3 envelopes, each labeled with one of our names. I picked up mine, my hand shaking. The seal was intact, with a single line scrawled across it. "For Ethan. When you're ready to forgive me." I didn't know if I could open it. Was this part of the plan he had hinted at in the video? Or was this something more personal, something private between us? Before I could decide, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I found James standing in the doorway, his eyes locked on the box. "You found it," he said quietly. "You knew about this?" I asked, my voice rising. James nodded. "Dad told me about the letters right before he died. He said we would each find ours when the time was right. So, it's not part of the will? No, James said. This is personal, just between us and him. I stared down at the envelope in my hand. I'm not sure if I want to read it. I read mine, James said, his voice unexpectedly gentle. It wasn't what I expected. What did it say? I asked, unable to stop myself. James gave a sad smile. That's between me and Dad, just like yours is between you and him. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, the first real gesture of brotherly affection between us in years, and quietly left the room. I was alone again, just me, the letter, and 1,000 unanswered questions. I stared at the envelope, wondering, would these words heal the rift between us, or would they just deepen the wounds? If any one of you refuses to participate, Peterson continued, the entire estate will be transferred to the Global Children's Foundation, and you will receive nothing beyond what was assigned in the first part of the will. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. I glanced at Olivia, then at James, both looking just as stunned as I was. He can't do this, Olivia finally said, her voice trembling. This is our family's legacy. This is exactly the legacy he intended to leave behind, Peterson said gently. William believed that money and power only matter if they're used to create meaningful change. But why all three of us? James asked, confusion flickering across his face. Olivia and I have been running the company for years. Ethan doesn't even know the first thing about managing a foundation. Because this isn't about business, I said suddenly, a realization striking me. This is about us. It's about healing this family. Peterson smiled at me, as if I had just uncovered the real heart of the will. Exactly, Ethan. William wanted you to work together, not as business partners, but as siblings. He hoped that by building this foundation you might find your way back to each other. Olivia stood and moved to the window, staring out over the vast gardens where we had once played as children. Do we have time to think about it? She asked quietly. William anticipated that. Peterson nodded. You have 1 week. If all three of you agree by then, we move forward with creating the Hart Family Foundation. If not, the second provision of the will takes effect, and the estate will be donated. With that, he closed the file, tucked the documents back into the envelope, and stood. I'll leave you to discuss it. I'll return in 1 week for your final decision. Once Peterson left, the three of us remained seated in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had just happened. I need a drink, James said finally, rising and heading to the liquor cabinet. He poured 3 glasses of whiskey, handing 1 each to Olivia and me, before sinking back into a chair across from us. So, I said after taking a large burning sip, what do we do now? I don't know anything about running a charity. We don't have a choice, Olivia said firmly, her voice tight. We have to agree. I won't let the family fortune end up in someone else's hands. Is that all you care about? I asked, frustration bubbling up. Money? Assets? It's not about the money, Olivia snapped, slamming her glass down so hard that whiskey sloshed over the rim. It's about everything I've sacrificed. I spent my entire life building this company, trying to make Dad proud. I gave up friends, relationships, even my dreams. And now he wants me to just walk away from it all? I really looked at my sister then, not the polished executive she presented to the world, but the exhausted woman who had been carrying the weight of expectations far too long. You're not walking away, I said softly. You're still a part of the company. You'll still have a voice in its future. But now, you can use it for something bigger, something real. You don't understand, Olivia said bitterly. You left. You don't know what it's like to stay. I don't know pressure. I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Do you think I left because it was easy? I left because I couldn't survive under the crushing weight of Dad's expectations. Every single day, I felt like I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, ambitious enough. I didn't leave because I gave up. I left because I needed to save myself. James suddenly placed his glass down, looking at us both, with an expression I had never seen before. Raw, pained, vulnerable. "Do either of you know why I worked those insane hours?" he said quietly. Not because I loved it, not because I was trying to impress Dad, but because I didn't want to come home, to an empty house where no one cared whether I lived or died. He drew a deep breath, bracing himself. "Sarah left me last year." Sarah, his fiancée, the woman with the warm smile and kind eyes. I had only met her once at their engagement party 3 years ago, and I had envied how she looked at him with pure love. "I'm sorry, James," I said, honestly, my heart breaking a little for him. "I didn't know." "How could you?" he said with a small shrug. "We haven't spoken in 3 years. Even when we lived under the same roof, we never really talked." "What did Dad do to us?" Olivia whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He made us into what he thought we needed to be," James answered, voice heavy. He turned Olivia into a mirror of himself, strong, driven, unstoppable. He turned me into the perfect heir, cold, calculating, unemotional, and he tried to turn Ethan into, I don't even know, maybe a better version of both of us. "But I didn't let it happen," I said quietly, feeling an odd sense of pride. "I chose my own path. And that's why he admired you," Olivia said softly, surprising me. "You did what we never could." We sat there for a long time, lost in our own thoughts. Finally, James moved to the window, gazing out at the fading sunset. "I think we should do it," he said without turning around. "Not for the money, not for Dad, for us. Maybe this is our last chance to find our way back to each other." I looked at my brother, and the man I had once thought incapable of feeling anything, and saw a flicker of hope. "I'm in," I said, getting to my feet. "I'll work with you. Both of you. We'll build this foundation together." We turned to Olivia, who still sat frozen, staring into space. "I don't know how to be anything but the CEO of Heart Enterprises," she whispered. "That's all I've been for the past 15 years. I don't know how to just be Olivia." "Neither do we," I said with a gentle smile. "But maybe we can figure it out. Together." Olivia looked at me, then at James, and finally she nodded. "All right," she said. "I'll try. For Dad and for us." And just like that, the decision was made. We would build the Hart Family Foundation. Not for wealth, not for prestige, but for the chance to heal what we had lost. But the decision was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, messy, and filled with old wounds, not yet fully healed. That night, after a quieter dinner, I returned to my room, the unopened letter from Dad still lying on my nightstand. I stared at the envelope for a long time, wondering, was I ready to forgive him? After everything? I thought about what I had learned these past few days, how he had followed my photography career from afar, how he had admired my courage even as he stayed silent, how he had built this final plan, not for control, but for redemption. Taking a deep breath, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back to my study, and perhaps you're ready to hear me out." "But the truth is," Olivia continued, her voice growing smaller, "I have a lot of regrets. I regret not pursuing music. I regret not making more time for family. I regret letting work consume my entire life." We sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. That's when the doorbell rang, yanking us back to the present. Who could that be? I wondered, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 10 p.m. James stood up. "I'll get it." A few minutes later, he returned, looking confused, with Peterson following behind him. The attorney still wore his sharp suit from earlier, but he looked more tired now, like he had lived a whole lifetime since morning. "I'm sorry to drop in so late," Peterson said, setting his briefcase down on the table. "But I just discovered something in the office safe. William instructed me to deliver it only after you'd read the will and made your initial decision." He pulled out a thick, carefully sealed envelope. Written across it in our father's handwriting were the words, "For my children, once you've found your way back to each other." Olivia gripped the armrest of her chair tightly. "There's more? We already agreed to form the foundation. Isn't that enough?" "I have no idea what's inside," Peterson admitted. "William simply asked that I ensure it reaches you at the right time." James took the envelope, weighing it in his hand as if it were something fragile. "We should open it," he said. I nodded. Olivia hesitated, but eventually gave a reluctant nod too. James carefully broke the seal and pulled out a thick stack of papers and a small USB drive. "There's a video," he murmured, handing the USB to Peterson. "Can you play it?" Peterson nodded and retrieved a laptop from his briefcase. A few minutes later, our father's face appeared on the screen, but this time, he wasn't in his study or a hospital room. He was sitting outside under the giant oak tree in the garden where we used to play as kids. "My dear children," he began, his voice softer than I ever remembered. "If you're watching this, it means you've agreed to work together on the Hart Family Foundation, and for that, I am so incredibly proud of you." He paused, looking away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "But there's something else I need to share. A truth I've kept hidden for many years. I hope by now you've rebuilt some of the family bond, because what I'm about to tell you might put that to the test." I felt a chill ripple down my spine. James and Olivia both tensed beside me. When I first started building Hart Enterprises, I had nothing but an idea and sheer determination. No one wanted to invest in a young man with no degree, no experience, and no connections. But then, I met Harold Bennett. I heard Olivia suck in a sharp breath. Harold Bennett, the man our father always spoke of with disdain, his supposed greatest rival in business. Harold believed in me when no one else did. He invested in my dream. He became a silent partner. Together, we built the foundation for what became Hart Enterprises. "Hart Bennett?" James repeated under his breath, disbelief written across his face. "But as success came," Dad continued, "I grew greedy. I wanted it all for myself. I forged documents. I cheated Harold out of his shares. I forced him out of the very company he helped create. It felt like the ground was giving way beneath my feet. The man I thought prized honor and integrity above all else had committed fraud? Harold tried to sue me, but I had more money, more power. I hired the best lawyers. I bought influence. I won the case, but I lost the only true friend I ever had." Tears shone in Dad's eyes, a sight I had never seen before. "That was the greatest mistake of my life, not because I lost a friend, but because I taught my children that success mattered more than honor, that the ends justified the means." "I can't believe this," Olivia whispered, her voice shaking. "All these years, he lectured us about integrity, about doing the right thing." "Maybe because he knew he hadn't," James said quietly. "Before Harold died," Dad continued, "he reached out to me. Not to reclaim money, not to seek revenge, but to forgive me. He said he didn't want to take bitterness to his grave. It was then I realized all the wealth, all the success, none of it could erase what I had done." Dad wiped his eyes, steadying himself. "In this envelope are documents that prove Harold's role in building Hart Enterprises. There is also a second will, my true will." My heart raced. Another will? "I'm leaving 30% of the company shares to the Bennett family. This as a way to begin repaying the debt I owe." It's not everything they deserve, but it's a start. Olivia shot to her feet. He can't do that. This company belongs to us. How will this affect the Hart Family Foundation? James asked, his voice impressively calm despite the tension radiating off him. The foundation will still be created, Dad said, answering James's unspoken fears. But instead of the Hart Family Foundation, it will be the Hart-Bennett Family Foundation. You will work alongside Harold's son, Michael. Michael Bennett, I echoed, stunned. Michael Bennett, the heir known for his philanthropy, not his thirst for wealth. I know this will be hard to accept, Dad said, but this is your chance, not just to right a wrong, but to build something better, something honest. He paused, his gaze steady on the camera. I raised you to be fighters, strong, determined, resilient. Now I ask you to fight for each other, not against each other. The screen went dark. The room plunged into a stunned silence. Olivia's hands trembled. James stared at the documents in disbelief. This has to be a joke, Olivia finally said, her voice shaking with fury. He can't do this. It's not legal. It's completely legal, Miss Hart, Peterson said calmly. William owned 100% of the company. He had the right to distribute it however he wished. But why the Bennetts? James shook his head. All our lives, he told us they were enemies, untrustworthy. Maybe because it was easier for him to turn guilt into hatred, I said softly, to justify what he did. Peterson slid a thick file across the table. Here are the new documents, including the second will. It becomes active tomorrow, unless you all choose to reject your inheritance. Or reject it? Olivia snapped. And then what happens to the company? It will all be transferred to the Hart-Bennett Family Foundation, Peterson explained. Michael Bennett would become the sole director. So this is blackmail, James muttered. Either we work with the son of the man our father betrayed, or we lose everything. I don't think William saw it that way, Peterson said gently. I believe he saw it as a way to heal the past and to build a better future. Does Michael Bennett even know about any of this? I asked. Not yet, Peterson said. William instructed me to inform him only after you made your decision. The room was thick with tension. I looked at Olivia, who was fighting to keep her composure. James stared grimly at the floor. I need air, Olivia muttered, bolting from the room. James sighed, getting up to follow her. I'll talk to her, he said. I stayed behind, trying to process everything. Did you know about any of this? I asked Peterson. I only learned the full story about a month before William passed, he said. He asked me to prepare the documents then. And what do you think? I pressed. Peterson hesitated, then said quietly, I think William lived with deep regret. And he tried, in his own way, to make things right before it was too late. You have until tomorrow morning, Peterson said, gathering his things. I'll return at 10 a.m. for your final decision. Or maybe, James finished quietly, staring out into the night-darkened garden, maybe we walk away and lose everything. Just then, Maria arrived, announcing that Michael Bennett had arrived. We made our way to the living room to meet him, a tall, composed man in his mid-40s, with early gray streaks in his hair and sharp, thoughtful eyes. He wore a simple but elegant outfit, a crisp white shirt and khakis. Not at all what I'd expected from the son of a billionaire. Good evening, he greeted, shaking each of our hands firmly. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Have you been here before? I asked, curious about any hidden ties between our families. Michael shook his head. My father spoke about this place often, but he never quite captured how beautiful it really is. We sat down, and Maria brought out coffee and tea. An awkward silence filled the room, no one quite sure how to begin this impossible conversation. I guess we should get straight to the point, Michael finally said. I read the copy of the will your attorney forwarded me on the way over. I realize this isn't easy for any of us. You know what happened between our fathers? James asked bluntly. Michael took a deep breath. I know they founded Hart Enterprises together. I know your father, William, maneuvered to seize control and forced my father out. I know my father tried to sue and lost. Then why didn't your family ever try to take back what was rightfully yours? Olivia demanded, suspicion lacing her voice. My father tried, Michael said quietly. But eventually he realized that bitterness was destroying him faster than any injustice could. He chose to let it go, not because he accepted defeat, but because he valued his peace of mind more than revenge. And he never regretted it? I asked, genuinely curious. Michael smiled softly. I'm sure he did sometimes, but he built something new. A company focused on sustainability and social good. It wasn't as big as Hart Enterprises, but it made a real difference. But now you have a chance to reclaim what was lost? Olivia pressed. What will you do? Michael paused for a long moment, considering his words carefully. If this were about revenge or money, he said, I would walk away. My family doesn't need more wealth, and I have no desire to reopen old wounds. But, James asked, sensing more, but the idea of a foundation, a bridge between our families, that matters, Michael said. It's not about correcting the past. It's about building a better future, one both our fathers could be proud of. So, you're willing to accept? I asked. Michael nodded. But only if you all want it too. I don't want to force myself into something where I'm not truly welcome. Olivia, who had been silent, finally spoke. How can we trust you? She asked, her voice sharp. How do we know you won't just use this as a way to take even more from us once you're inside? Michael didn't flinch. He nodded as if the question was completely fair. You can't know for sure, just like I can't know for sure that you won't try to squeeze me out once things settle. That's the risk we all have to take. That's called trust. Something, frankly, our fathers were never able to find. But maybe, I said quietly, maybe we can be better than them. Maybe we can choose to trust, to build something together instead of tearing each other apart. James nodded slowly. Ethan's right. This isn't about money anymore, it's about breaking the cycle, doing what's right. But this is our legacy, Olivia said, though her voice wavered, the fight in her dimming. Everything we've worked for. You'll still have your company, I reminded her gently. You'll still be CEO. We'll still own the majority. But now we'll be able to do it with a clear conscience. Olivia looked at me, then at James. Finally, she turned her gaze to Michael. There was a long, loaded pause, and then, as if an invisible weight lifted from her shoulders, she exhaled. All right, she said softly. We'll do it. We'll honor our father's final wishes. We'll build the Hart Bennett Foundation. Michael smiled, a warm, genuine smile. I think both our fathers would be proud. Not for them, I said. For us. For the people we'll help. Because it's simply the right thing to do. We raised our glasses, coffee and tea, not champagne, and toasted to a new beginning, not just for the Hart Bennett Foundation, but for all of us. As Michael prepared to leave, he paused at the door and turned back. My father always said, he told us, his greatest failure wasn't losing the company, it was losing a friend. He always hoped, one day our families would find their way back to each other. And now we have, I said, feeling a strange, peaceful warmth settle over me. After Michael left, we stayed in the living room, each of us deep in thought. The night stretched long, but none of us felt tired. Too much had changed. Too much had been forgiven. Do you think we made the right choice? Olivia finally asked, her voice small and vulnerable, a side of her I had rarely seen. I do, James said. Maybe this was the lesson Dad had been trying to teach us all along. He just didn't know how to say it until it was too late. What lesson? I asked. That real success isn't measured by money or power, James said, but by character by the choices we make, and that it's never too late to do the right thing. Olivia flipped through the documents Peterson had left and found a smaller note tucked in the back. "A message from Dad," she said, unfolding it carefully. She read aloud, "My beloved children, if you're reading this, it means you chose the harder path, but the right one. I spent my life learning this lesson and nearly missed it altogether. Don't repeat my mistakes. I raised you to be warriors. Now I pray you'll fight for each other, not against each other." Silence settled over us as we took in his final words. I looked at my siblings, no longer strangers. In their eyes, I saw no anger, no resentment, only understanding, acceptance, and maybe, just maybe, a spark of something new. Hope. "So," I said, breaking the silence with a small smile, "what's next?" James smiled, a real, genuine smile I hadn't seen from him in years. "We build a new legacy," he said. "Not Hart, not Bennett, ours." Olivia nodded, and for the first time since I came home, she placed her hand lightly on my shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. "Together," she said, "as a family." As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, we were still there, sharing memories, laughter, even a few tears, piecing back together the family we thought we'd lost. When Peterson returned at 10 a.m., we were ready, not just to sign the papers, but to start a new journey, side by side. William Hart's final legacy wasn't about wealth or corporate empires. It was about giving his children a second chance, a chance to heal, to learn from his mistakes, to build a future rooted not in ambition or power, but in honor, compassion, and love. A legacy we could finally, truly, be proud of. The Final Legacy. Part 6. 1 year later, I stood by the window of the new Hart Bennett Foundation headquarters, gazing out over the bustling streets of New York City. Autumn had returned and golden leaves drifted gently across Central Park. I couldn't help but think about how much life had changed since the day we read Dad's will. "Ethan, they're waiting for us," Olivia's voice called from behind me. I turned, smiling at my sister. Olivia had changed the most out of all of us. She was still the CEO of Hart Enterprises, but she was no longer the cold, unapproachable woman who lived only for work. Her hair now flowed freely around her shoulders, and there was a new light in her eyes, the light of someone who had finally found balance and true purpose. "They can wait 1 more minute," I replied, grinning. "Today's a big day, after all." She nodded and joined me at the window. 1 year, she said softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come." "Do you think Dad ever saw this coming?" I asked, a question I'd asked myself more than once over the past year. Olivia smiled wistfully. "Maybe not exactly, but I think he hoped. He planted the seeds and trusted we'd find a way to make them grow. And we had. The Hart Bennett Foundation had already supported over 5,000 underprivileged students, built 3 community centers, and funded countless arts and education programs. But more importantly, it had brought us closer, not just the Hart siblings, but Michael Bennett too, who had become a dear friend and an irreplaceable ally. "We should head down," Olivia said, glancing at her watch. "James is probably freaking out." I laughed. James, the former cool, composed strategist, had become the most anxious among us. Since Sarah had come back into his life, an unexpected reunion that had thrilled all of us, James had softened. He'd become more emotional, more protective of his family, and now more excited than ever to be a soon-to-be father. We headed down to the Grand Hall, where the celebration for the Foundation's 1-year anniversary was about to begin. The room was buzzing. Business partners, scholarship recipients, artists, teachers, and so many others whose lives had been touched by our work. James stood near the stage, hand in hand with Sarah, her baby bump proudly visible. When he spotted us, he waved, his face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. "You made it," he sighed in relief. "Michael just called. He'll be here any minute." "Everything ready?" Olivia asked, scanning the room with her familiar businesslike precision. "Perfect," Sarah assured her. "Stop worrying and enjoy it." I smiled warmly at Sarah. She had become an irreplaceable part of our family, bringing warmth, patience, and joy into a world that once felt so cold. She'd even helped Olivia rediscover her passion for the piano, a gift my sister treasured more than she let on. Just then, Michael entered, calm and steady as always. Even after a year of working side by side, I still admired his quiet strength and unwavering kindness. "Sorry, I'm late," he said as he joined us. "Meeting ran longer than expected." "You're right on time," I assured him. "We just got here ourselves." Together, we stepped onto the stage. As I looked around the packed room, a deep sense of gratitude filled me. A year ago, I'd come home with a heart full of anger and regret. Now I stood here with a family restored and a purpose found. James, ever the eldest, stepped up to the microphone first. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate the first anniversary of the Hart Bennett Foundation. A year ago, we set out on a journey, not fully knowing where it would lead. We only knew that we wanted to make a difference. To build a legacy both of our families could be proud of." Olivia followed him. "This foundation has become more than a charitable organization for us. It has become a way to heal, to grow, to learn. It has taught us that true success isn't measured in bank accounts or job titles, but by the lives we impact and the hope we create." Then Michael stepped forward. "When I was invited to join this project, I wasn't sure if two families with such a complicated history could truly work together. But the foundation has proven something important, that the past doesn't have to define the future. We can choose a different path, a better one." Finally, it was my turn. I stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the crowd, at the lives we had touched, and felt an overwhelming sense of pride. A year ago, I returned home angry and broken, convinced our family was beyond repair. But my father's final legacy wasn't about wealth or reputation. It was about a simple but powerful truth. It's never too late to do the right thing, to mend what's broken, to start again. I paused, swallowing the emotion rising in my throat. The Hart Bennett Foundation isn't just about helping others, though that is a vital part of our mission. It's about creating a new legacy, one built on integrity, compassion, and forgiveness. A legacy that both William Hart and Harold Bennett would be proud of. As we raised our glasses to toast to another successful year ahead, I felt it deep in my heart. Dad was watching, and finally, truly proud. Not because we had amassed wealth or built an empire, but because we had learned the lesson he could never quite teach us in life. That a person's true legacy isn't measured by what they accumulate, but by the lives they touch, the relationships they nurture, and the love they leave behind. After the ceremony, the Hart and Bennett families walked together to the cemetery where both William and Harold rested. By some strange coincidence, or maybe fate, they were buried just a few plots apart. We laid flowers at both graves and stood in respectful silence, each lost in our own thoughts. A gentle breeze stirred the autumn leaves, and I felt a deep, soothing peace settle over me. The circle had closed. The journey had found its end and its beginning. "I think they'd both be proud," Michael said quietly, glancing between the two headstones. "I think so too," Olivia agreed, squeezing my hand and James's. "I think they've finally found peace." As we turned to leave, I cast one last glance back and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for your final gift. We won't let you down." And as we walked away, Hart, Bennett no longer divided, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Not as two separate families, but as one family, united not by bloodlines or rivalry, but by love, respect, and a shared promise to build a better future. And that was the only legacy that truly mattered.